Hey there fellow crafters and welcome back. In this video I'll show you how to make simple and awesome looking rocky outcrops for your wargaming terrain. I'm Adam Haig and this is 3D Games. Stick around to the end of this video to see a whole table of this terrain that'll leave you pining for more. There are lots of ways to simulate rocks in miniature scale, from plaster cast rocks to slate, or even, well, rocks. But there is a cheap, lighter and more versatile material for rocks than rocks. Bark. If you're lucky enough to live near forestry like I do, a simple bushwalk or mountain bike can result in a solid harvest of pine bark. Otherwise, a load of firewood can be a treasure trove for materials. This stuff is so cheap, it literally grows on trees. You can buy bags of bark from a garden store, but they tend to be lots of small chunks which are useful in their own right for making smaller rocks or building up composite formations. But today I'm going to use these big chunky pieces. To be safe, it pays to cook your bark at 90 degrees Celsius for about 30 minutes. This should kill off any pests, molds and other microorganisms. Just make sure you're keeping a close eye on it in case of spontaneous combustion. Piney. Now let's get crafting. Look for chunks that have interesting textures and shapes. As you can see, some of these bark chunks have straight edges where they were cut. These will need to be broken up or they won't look very natural. You could use a craft knife and carefully trim and shape the bark to create the look you want, or just take a hammer and bash the straight cuts into rough, irregular textures. The tactile nature of breaking apart and repurposing a simple natural resource like this is something I find surprisingly fun and satisfying. To make some rocky formations that are jutting out of the ground, it is necessary to create some straight cuts which will be the contact point with the terrain bases. You could use a handsaw for this, but it sure speeds things up with power tools like this table saw. I had a bunch of bases pre-cut out of 4.75mm MDF when I was making my forest terrain, so all I needed to do was taper the edges with a craft knife and then sand the edges. This creates a nice smooth tapered edge which helps the bases blend into your game mat or table. The next step is to secure the bark to the bases. For this I used liquid nails. A hot glue gun also works well for this and is a lot faster to set. I like using liquid nails because the longer setting time allows you to keep adjusting the configuration of the bark chunks for longer. Using a popsicle stick, you can also scrape away or shape any excess liquid nails that oozes out between the joins. Leaving the assembled pieces overnight will achieve a strong enough bond to allow you to paint, and after a couple of days they should be rock solid. When assembling your rocky outcrops, it pays to have a variation of heights and sizes. This will help achieve a more natural and realistic look, and will result in much cooler looking cinematic battlefields rather than too much uniformity. Personally, I find this stage to be really enjoyable and therapeutic. The simple pleasure of joining different chunks together to create unique rock formations and interesting strategic areas for your troops. With your rocky outcrops assembled, it's time to paint. Start by priming the entire piece with black acrylic paint. This will provide a solid base for the subsequent layers of paint and add depth to the terrain. Next, apply irregular patches of colour to the rocks. This can be sprayed on with an airbrush or stippled with a paintbrush, similar to the leopard spot technique with plaster cast rocks. Use this technique to apply various hues of brown, ochre and green onto the surface. These colours create a subtle base that mimic the natural colours you'd find in nature. Here I was going for the look of rocky outcrops in a temperate forest, but you could easily experiment with different colours to simulate the look of other biomes and climates. Dry brushing comes next. The trick with dry brushing is to take a small amount of paint onto your brush, then remove the excess onto a palette. You then run the bristles of your brush across the textured surface of the bark. The amount of paint transferred is dependent on how forcefully or lightly you do this. It's a very simple and effective method for emphasizing textures. Again, the colours you use are up to your particular taste. For these rocks, I started with a very light grey all over, then small amounts of white, picking out the raised areas that would catch the light. With one of my bark rocky outcrops, I painted it purely by brush. Start by stippling a range of base colours onto the bark. Here I used yellow ochre, burnt sienna and forest green. Apply the paint heavily in irregular patches. It looks absolutely horrific, but trust me, it'll all be tied together in the dry brushing phase. As you dry brush, you can see that the blotches of base colour become subtle variations of undertones and lend a more natural rocky look than standard greys. Next, we'll apply the ground cover to the MDF bases. To do this, simply paint the surface with PVA glue, making sure you get a good coverage. For the ground cover, I like to use a mix of tile grout and soil, as this provides a really strong and natural looking base. If you do use tile grout, make sure you wear a mask to protect your lungs. Next, spray each piece with isopropyl alcohol and then do the same with matte sealant. I'm using a watered down mix of matte Mod Podge, which is a cheaper alternative to pre-made sealant. The isopropyl alcohol will help the sealant to soak into the recesses and deeper pockets of ground cover. The matte sealant helps protect and seal in place the paint along with fixing the tile grout solid. To add some textural variation to the ground cover, use some PVA glue and sprinkle coarse sand and small gravel around the base of the bark rocks. Here I used some lake sand, which has a good range of grit sizes. Now let's flock these rocks. Start with the darker colours first. Here I sprinkled some Woodland Scenic's fine turf weeds onto the base and onto the rocks themselves. You gradually build up the colours and textures with successively lighter coloured flock. Similar to painting, you want to start with base colours and build up highlights. Here I'm using burnt grass, which is a nice olive green colour. This can be messy, so it's a good idea to use something like this oven tray to catch any overspill, which can then be reapplied. To create more texture, add some coarse turf. Sprinkle small patches of it here and there against the base of the rocks and in the crevices, and anywhere you'd expect small bushes and foliage to grow. Generally speaking, using a wide variety of colours and textures really adds to the realism, so don't worry about overdoing it. Just keep adding flocks until you're happy with the look. Here I decided to add some sprinkles of fine turf earth because the yellow colour adds a nice complement to the greens and creates the look of lichen growing on the surface of the rock. Again, with these rocks I'm going for a temperate forest look, so used flock colours that suit. You could easily go for more yellows or browns or darker greens depending on the biome you're trying to replicate. Here's an example of the same rocky outcrop terrain finished with different colour combinations. Here's a massive thanks to all my wonderful patrons who continue to support this channel. I truly appreciate it. I wouldn't be able to continue this work without you. Check out the link in my Patreon account in the description if this is something you'd like to be a part of. If you like this content, then please like and subscribe and hit the bell and share with your friends. Let me know what you think and share any hobby tips in the comments below. If you're interested in having a go at making terrain like this, then consider purchasing your hobby supplies through my affiliate links listed in the description. This will send a little cash my way, which helps pay for this content. Right, now back to these rocks. By working systematically through all these steps, you can easily and quickly complete a whole board worth of rocky terrain for your battles. Any overspill is collected and kept as a nice mix of flock and grit, similar to Geek Gaming base ready products. All the flocks and aggregates are sealed in place by once again spraying with isopropyl alcohol followed by matte sealant. Some of the fine flocks will probably fly off when you do this, and it can pay to go back with a light sprinkle of flock while the matte sealant is still wet for a mossy look on the rocks. And there we have it! Beautiful and realistic looking rocky outcrops for your little soldiers to battle amongst. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you here next time on 3D Games. Till then, good hobbying everyone.